Okay, so now we are going to finish up the PowerPoint slides on development. So we were just talking about Piaget. Now we're going to move on to social development. So in addition to physical development, cognitive development, there's also social development. So the first thing we're going to talk about is imprinting. And this is where it has to do with how certain animals will imprint on the first other animal that they see. It's usually their mother, but once in a while something bizarre happens and they might imprint on maybe a person instead of an animal. So why don't you take a look at this video so that you understand what I'm talking about. There's this famous researcher, Carl Lorenz, and he did a lot of work with animals, and he kind of came up with this idea of imprinting and demonstrated it. So take a look at that, and then we'll come back. Okay, so hopefully you were able to watch that video, and if you're interested, you can find tons of videos on Carl Lorenz and the different things that he did. He was a really fascinating guy. So imprinting would be the very first moving thing that the chick sees, it will start to follow, okay? If it's its mom, that's great, but it could be something else, like in that case, Carl Lorenz. He also came up with the idea of critical periods. So this is a period during development when a certain thing has to happen in order for development to progress normally. So for instance, visual development, your vision isn't going to develop normally unless you see a lot of different stimuli during a certain critical period. You need to see colors, you need to see things that are stationary, things that are moving. You need to see light and dark. If you don't see all this during this development period, this period of development, your vision is not going to be normal later. So he came up with both of these concepts. He also looked at attachment, and this became something that a lot of psychologists wanted to study in humans. So that's what we're going to talk about next. So attachment just refers to an emotional bond with a caregiver. Now, notice it doesn't say mother. It often is, but it could be father, it could be an aunt or an uncle or a grandmother, just whoever is taking care of that young organism, okay? So next we come to another researcher that did studies with animals. His name is Harry Harlow, and he did a series of experiments with rhesus monkeys that taught us a lot about attachment. Now, were these experiments nice to these rhesus monkeys? No, they really weren't. But it does teach us a lot about how important a caregiver is and what about a caregiver is important. And before he did this, people did not realize that attachment was such an important thing. So why don't you take a look at that video and then we'll come back and talk more about that. Okay, so the Harlow experiments, he took these baby monkeys and he was curious about whether it was just being fed. Was that the important thing that a caregiver provided? Or is it something else? So he came up with this study with the surrogate mother monkeys. One provided food, one provided kind of contact comfort, was soft, and maybe made the little monkey feel more secure. And sure enough, it was this contact comfort that was most important. So being a parent or a caregiver is about more than just providing food and water. It's about that actual emotional attachment, if you will. All right. He also found that if monkeys were raised without their mothers or without an adult monkey caregiver, they didn't learn a lot of important things they would need to learn to function well in their society. Okay, so they had a lot of problems as adults if they weren't raised with an adult monkey. So this was important because it showed us that a child's environment growing up is really important. Before that, we didn't really know that. How does this relate to massage therapy? It used to be when babies were born prematurely, we wouldn't touch them, or we would only touch them through like a glove or plastic, because we didn't want to infect them with something that they couldn't fight off. But we now know that premature babies who are touched actually recover, get better faster than those that aren't. So these days, a premature baby is touched. Now, sometimes we still do this through a glove or through plastic, but we definitely take time to touch them as much as we can to help them feel more secure. And then that in turn seems to actually lead to better health later on. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about in social development is attachment styles. So after Harlow's studies, then some researchers wanted to look at attachment in humans. So they came up with something called the strange situation. And in this situation, they would bring in, it was usually a mother and her child, and they'd put them in an unfamiliar room with some unfamiliar toys. And once the child got playing with the toys, oh no, I'm going too fast. Then they would bring in another adult that the child didn't know, see how the child reacted. Once the child settled down and was playing with the toys, then the mother would leave and leave the baby alone with this strange person. They would see how the baby reacted, and then after a few minutes, the mother would come back in, and again, they would see how the baby reacted to that. What they found is that most of the babies were what they called securely attached. So this was 60 to 65%. And here it basically what they saw is that the caregiver was sensitive to the child's needs. So if the child was upset, the caregiver would try to make them feel better. If the child crawled into the parent's arms, the parent would give the child a hug, and so on. So most babies fell into this. So they would play happily when the mother was there. They would cry when she left, but they would settle down quickly and be happy again when she returned. The rest of the children were insecurely attached, and there were two types of this, anxious and avoidant. So these children that had this insecure attachment would often have problems later in life. So they might be depressed, they might have behavioral problems, conduct disorder. And the two types of insecure attachment are avoidant, which is about 20 to 25%, and anxious. So the people in the avoidant category, the children would act as if they didn't even care when their mother left. And then when she came back again, they really would act like it didn't matter to them at all. Anxious, insecure attachment occurred for about 10 to 15% of these kids. And when the mother would try to leave, they would cling to her and they would cry and get really upset. And then when she came back, they might act indifferent, like the avoidant kids did, or they might act angry. They might try to hit her or something like that. So again, this was just more evidence that the relationship between a child and a caregiver is really important and influences things later in life. So this brings us to the question about daycare. Should you put your kid in daycare? Should you not? How do you decide? And as you can imagine, it's complicated. It depends. In general, children who go to daycare, there have been some studies that show they might be a little more aggressive than other children. They might not obey parents and teachers as well as some other kids do. But on the plus side, they tend to be more outgoing and a little more independent than children that don't go to daycare. But as you can imagine, it depends so much on the quality of the care. So who's taking care of this child? Is that caregiver responsive to the child's needs? Do they set some boundaries and rules? Are they consistent with how they react when the child doesn't follow those? Things like that. So it really is your choice when you're a parent. There are plenty of children that go to daycare and turn out, very well with good relationships. There are plenty of children that stay home that also turn out just fine with good relationships. So it really just depends. All right, that is the end of the development lectures all together. This is probably somewhere around an hour. So let me know if you have any questions. I'll probably try to find a video for you to watch to give you a little more information about development. Thank you. See you later.